Hi everybody, it's Hilary here from We Love Smart Keto. Great to see you here today. How are you all doing? Give me a 1 if you're watching live on the broadcast, and give me a 2 if you're watching on the replay. I'm just experimenting today with just a different way of broadcasting to you through my laptop. So just let me know that you can see me. Just give me a like if you can see me and hear me. Great, thanks for that. That's fantastic. Today we're going to be talking about the long-term effects of the keto lifestyle. And this is something that I think Diane might have requested. I can't quite recall now. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Obviously, we know that it can be really beneficial for short-term weight loss and short-term even reversal of type 2 diabetes. But what are the long-term implications of doing the keto diet? I just want to make sure you can hear me. Just give me a like or a yes if you can hear me. That would be really helpful, just because I'm experimenting with just a new way of coming across to you. So what we're talking about today is really, just let me check my notes here, that it is really important to understand the long-term effects of what we're doing. I mean, there are many ways to lose weight. If you just take a speed or amphetamines, you lose weight because your metabolism speeds up, but that's not really a very helpful long-term sustainable way to lose weight. You can follow the low-fat diet. Oh, fantastic, Addie! You can hear us. Fantastic, thank you. Awesome, loud and clear, fantastic. Also, you can follow, a low-fat, higher carbohydrate diet. The long-term implications of that are that it's not beneficial for your overall well-being. There's some studies done actually on Boeing employees, and in particularly the women of that Boeing study, which I think was done in the 1970s or the 1980s. Demonstrated that really there was no long-term health benefit at all for the women on that study. So just tell me if you've tried many different things. Tell me, roughly how many different types of diets have you tried? I know that I've tried quite a few. When I was younger, the first time I ever tried a diet, I just made it up myself what I was going to do, and for some reason I decided that oranges, crackers and coffee was the thing to do, and absolutely I lost weight. It was very miserable. I lost a ton of weight, but absolutely wasn't sustainable, and for sure wasn't good for my health. And I hate to count the number of things that I tried subsequently to that, and none of them, they all worked for a time, but none of them really sustainable in a way to live long term. So tell me, how many have you tried in your life? Have you tried one different type of diet? Have you tried 2? Have you tried 10? We know that over time, the more times you sort of yo-yo diet, the more times you lose weight and then put weight back on, the harder it is to lose weight the next time. So what I want to talk about today, as we said, is the long-term effects of the keto diet, and whether it's a sustainable diet. So there's a few ways to look at this. There's not been that many long-term studies, so I've had a bit of a look. There's certainly some anecdotal evidence. If we go back and we look at the diet, for example, in the 1850s in the United States, it's very hard to work out what people were eating then, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that people really ate an awful lot of meat, particularly in the north, because the summer growing season was so short, and people often didn't think it was really worth the effort to grow spinach or to grow broccoli because it was such a short growing season. And so meat was abundant. They used to see these flocks of birds that would take days to fly over these flocks of birds. So people ate a lot more meat, in fact more meat than they do these days. They never ate chicken. Chicken was kind of regarded as a really special treat, and chickens were saved for eggs. And nowadays we eat a lot more chicken than they did in those days. But the anecdotal evidence, for the evidence from sort of newspaper reports and people's journals of the time, is that people were tall and they were strong and they were fit and they were healthy. So really, if we're looking back in history, obviously they had other issues around, infectious diseases and, accidents and all sorts of other things that impacted on their mortality. But the diet was not really the key issue for them in terms of health. So that's one piece of evidence if we look back in history. Another thing to look at is to look at people who don't follow the Western diet and see how they do on the Western diet, to see people who eat a more sort of keto lifestyle currently, just because of that's the nature of where they live and what they do. That's also a really useful place to look. So if we look, at the Maasai people in Africa, and they're the people who live in the plains, and they drink a lot of milk. They actually drink blood, and they also eat a lot of meat. Their diet is extremely keto, very similar to the keto diet, and they're very tall, very athletic people, and they walk for days with their herds of cattle and the animals that they're farming, and they have very tall, very fit, and no evidence of heart disease in those people. So you could say, is it just something that's special and genetic? Have they got a special gene? And unfortunately, the information is that when some of those people go and live in the city, and adopt a more Western lifestyle, that they unfortunately get the less good health markers that the other people in the city get. So their blood glucose goes up, they get more heart disease and things. So it's not a genetic thing, it's about their diet. Now, one of the things that we have to be really careful about is that association is not causation. So if you've done any science, or if you remember this from school, there's this famous saying, correlation is not causation. So I just want to explain what that means. So what that means is really that, for example, there's evidence that if you floss your teeth every day, that people who floss their teeth every day tend to live longer than people who don't. So does that mean that if you floss your teeth, you're magically going to live longer? No. It's an association. It means that, the association is that people in general who look after their teeth, probably look after other aspects of their health as well. They're probably more generally healthy, and so they tend to live longer. So it's not, flossing your teeth causes you to live longer. So while all of that sort of anecdotal stuff is really useful and helps provide context, to really understand the benefits of the keto diet, we have to look at some of the scientific studies. And unfortunately, there aren't very many sort of randomized control trials, which is the gold standard, if you like, of scientific studies. And that's where you take two groups of people. One person one group randomly gets assigned to getting the treatment, and the other group randomly gets assigned to not getting the treatment, and they compare the two and see if there's any statistically significant, so like a really real difference between the two. Now, with the long-term benefits of keto, I haven't been able to find any of those studies, but the study that I have found is a study from Virta Health, who do sort of treatment and research for people with type 2 diabetes. And the study that they did, I'm going to try not to get too technical. So this was not a randomized study. So people self-selected as to which group they went into. They weren't put by the researchers into one or other of the groups. So that makes it slightly less good than a randomized control trial, but it's still a pretty good study. Give me a thumbs up or a like if you're following me here. I'm trying not to get too technical with all of this. So please just let me know. Yes, you can understand what I'm talking about. That'd be really handy. So let's talk about this study. So in this study, there's about 350 people. 260 or so of them decided to do the ketogenic diet. And the rest of them, the sort of 70 or so, decided to follow a more traditional standard of care for losing weight. And these were all, some of them had type 2 diabetes, some of them had insulin resistance, and they were followed for 2 years. And what they got, the people in in the keto program, the therapeutic carbohydrate restriction is the medical term for it, but basically the keto diet, they got a lot of support. Okay, so they had education sessions weekly initially, and then going back to monthly and quarterly over that 2 years. They had specialists to help them, and they also had an app that they could put all of their statistics into, so what they ate, their blood markers, they were pricking their fingers for ketone levels and for glucose levels every day. So they got a lot of support, and they would get feedback on how they were doing over that 2 years. So an enormous amount of support. And the other group got the same, but they just weren't following the keto diet. They were doing more of a low-fat, high-carb kind of traditional kind of lose weight kind of program. And they followed them for 2 years. So do you want to know the outcome? It's really quite striking, the outcome. So one of the things that people have been concerned about with the keto diet is actually being able to stick to it, to be able to do it for a long period of time. And we know things like, the cabbage diet or the follow your blood type diet, really hard to stick to. So in this program, 60%, so over half of the people stuck to the program for 2 years. And that, while it sounds not that impressive, that's actually incredibly impressive for this kind of lifestyle. And how did they do? Well, on average, they lost 12% of their body weight. We know that if you lose 5%, just a mere 5% of your body weight, that immediately has health benefits. So that's a really phenomenal thing to achieve, 10% over 2 years. And I know that obviously that's an average, so some people would have done better, some people would have done less well. Just let me look at my notes here about how they did. So they all basically improved their weight to some extent. Their blood markers all improved. So even if you're not losing weight, the first part of losing weight is actually to get your blood markers, to get your glucose down, to get your insulin down, and they all did that. And in fact, of the people who had diabetes, there was a number of the people in the group that had type 2 diabetes. Half of them actually reversed their diabetes completely through that program, which is phenomenal. And the amount of medication that the group as a whole was taking halved across the whole group. So that's a phenomenal outcome, to halve the amount of medication related to blood sugar and things that they need, and their heart issues that they needed to take. So that's a phenomenal outcome as well. One of their liver markers, their triglyceride markers, so their fatty acid markers in their blood, all of those things improved across the group. So that's, it's just phenomenal. One of the things that people have been concerned about is bone density on the keto diet, and whether you might lose your calcium out of your bones faster than you might otherwise do. And obviously, particularly for women as we age, our bone density is is a really important thing. We don't want to end up in a situation of having osteoporosis. That is not a pleasant situation to be in. And obviously, as you get much older, the risk of breaking a hip or something is a really terrible risk for your health. So we need from a young age to really focus on our bone density and keep that strong. And the fantastic news about this study was that there was no change to bone density amongst those participants across a 2-year period. So that's a really fantastic outcome. So I think for me, looking at that study, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that the keto diet is fantastic, and we can see quite a lot of athletes and very well renowned researchers like Professor Tim Noakes, who really and Dr. Gary Fettke, who are doing super well on this diet and really advocating for it. But that's not the same as a scientific study. At the moment, we don't have like a gold standard scientific study to say whether the keto diet, the long-term effects of the keto diet. However, we do have a pretty good study in this study of 260 people across a couple of years. It's a 5-year study, so they're going to keep updating it every year. And the indications are that people can stick to the diet. And they said that a lot of the reasons that people dropped off was due to some family issues and things. And the other thing is that it's really great for their health markers, for their blood health markers, so reducing inflammation, improving their insulin levels, improving their blood glucose levels, reducing the fats in their livers. So really, fantastic outcomes, and no adverse effects from bone density. So, all the things that we need to do for our bodies for maintaining our bone density, all maintained on the keto diet. So for me, I think that's a big win. Just give me a note in the comments. Perhaps you could write win if you agree, and if it gives you some more confidence. So put maybe a yes or a heck yeah in the comments if that's really helped your confidence about doing keto. I'd really love to hear that. One of the things you might be interested in is I'm thinking about perhaps doing a course and a program around keto, so help people understand keto and make it a really simple and easy part of your lifestyle. So if you're and at the moment I'm just doing some research around that. So if you're interested, just send me a DM. It's Hilary Chapman, and just let me know that you're interested, and we can perhaps have a chat. At this stage, I haven't built the course. I'm just really trying to understand, what people would like and how to make it really, really a super duper course for you. So that's everything that I have to you today. So just let me check any comments and things. I'm just running a couple of systems here. All right, so I think we're really good here. So thanks very much, guys, for coming today, and hope you really enjoyed this chat. And we'll see you again. It's Hilary at We Love Smart Keto, and we'll see you again soon in the group and on the page. See ya, and on YouTube. See ya. Bye.